Etsy is a vast and delightful community of makers and people that want to buy interesting handmade things from around the world. Today we're meeting Nicole Vanderbilt, who's the managing director of Etsy in the UK and Europe, Australia and Canada. They made nearly $900 million worth of sales in 2012. Nicole's going to be giving us some insight into that amazing community, and she even manages to mention the Women's Institute. If you've tried to buy anything nice as a present online in the last few years, I'd be very surprised if you haven't ended up at Etsy at some point. Nicole Vanderbilt is MD of Etsy in Australia, Canada and Europe. Is that correct? Welcome to Tech Sessions.
Thanks for having me.
Lovely to have Etsy in our beautiful Box Park space. If there is anyone out there who hasn't yet discovered Etsy, can you tell us what it does?
Sure. Etsy is a global marketplace for vintage and handmade goods.
Yeah, so like eBay, but with soul.
Yes, with real people behind
Yes.
every transaction.
How did you end up at Etsy? What's your background and what do you bring to the company?
Sure. I've been working in the internet space for a very long time now. And about 10 years ago, I moved to London. You can tell from my accent, I'm originally American. And have worked at places like Google and Bebo, and was running a UK-based startup just before Etsy called My Deco. And so a big theme for me in my career has always been working on consumer internet sites and technology, but also on trying to help the little guy. So a lot of what attracted me to Google in the first place, which I think a lot of people forget about Google now, is how much it helped small businesses get discovered in the internet space and take these businesses that were traditionally only offline and actually really help them grow and become discovered by a much bigger audience.
Yeah, and now obviously Google is much broader than that, and they are the main point of access into the internet for every company of every scale. How does Etsy, though, there's an inherent sort of challenge there in scaling Etsy and making it massive but still feel relevant to the little person, because there's essentially a transaction that goes on there between the person that is making and crafting, I don't know, a beautifully hand-stitched iPod case and one person that wants to buy it. But how do you retain that feeling when you've got so many users?
Yeah, that is a really good question and something we take really seriously, because we think our strongest strategic advantage is that we do have real people behind every single store and every single transaction. And so a lot of what we do and how we prioritize our time and our work is based on our sellers' needs and listening to our community. I think we're really fortunate in that we stay pretty close and they keep us pretty honest because they have such a strong voice in our business.
Search, just from my recent experience on Etsy, it seems like search is getting harder and harder to find the thing that you really want, or getting things to stand out. What are you doing in that area in helping sellers be found and be distinctive?
Yeah, it's again an area that we take really seriously and we've spent a lot of time on, and some of it is about them getting discovered on Etsy, but some of it is also about helping them get discovered off Etsy. So one of the things we've launched for the very first time here in the UK is an affiliate program where we're working with bloggers so that they can take all the lovely Etsy product that they find and through their filter of taste or the theme that they're working on actually present it to a new audience. So you'll see us do more and more of that over time. Pinterest, candidly, has been a really great gift to us because it's added another way to browse and discover products on Etsy that's off Etsy.
Well, there's a really interesting dynamic there, because Pinterest, you could argue, is visual search for the web, and in contrast to the very sort of functional, much more mechanical way of searching, which is inputting text into Google, Pinterest provides a much more instinctive human response to something you like and you click it.
Yeah.
So talk a bit more about what that means for Etsy, a kind of visual navigation of the web.
Yeah, I think that's such a great question because it's the thing I personally am the most excited about, having worked in the internet space for a very long time and having seen it been mostly focused on things like airline tickets and books and digital cameras where structured data kind of let you get directly to a product very quickly. The last 3 years have been this amazing next phase for us in e-commerce, where suddenly there are products, it's viable to buy products that aren't these commodities, because for the first time you can actually browse them in a way that isn't about inputting text into a box. And this is something I spent a lot of time on at my last company when I worked at My Deco, because how do you describe furniture in words? You know, even if I wanted to buy that chair, how would I, even begin to put into words what it looks like? And so now that things like Pinterest and certain of the experiences on Etsy have become more social and more visual, people are able to wander around the internet world in a way that they've been able to the retail world in the past.
What does this all mean for mobile as well? And we know from nearly every site we talk to, it's 25, sometimes 60% of transactions, depending on the site, are now mobile, as in tablets and mobile, not even necessarily out in the real world, but just 50% of tablet use at home, quite typically. So how do you ease the path to a transaction which is notoriously fiddly on a smaller device or a touch screen?
Sure.
What are you doing in this area?
So we've done the stuff that a lot of companies have done. So we've worked on our mobile browser experience as well as native apps on Android and on Apple. And we've seen a lot of increase in usage there as well. For us, what's interesting is it happens both on the buyer and the seller side. So it's empowering for buyers to be able to browse and or purchase from wherever they are. But it's also really empowering to our sellers, who are these very busy, small, independent creative businesses, to be able to check their email or their sales while they're on the go, while they're out buying supplies, while they're at their studio, and not have to be so wed to a desk and a desktop the whole time.
How are you thinking about localism and how providers or sellers are part of a particular community with a really strong identity? Obviously we're in Shoreditch now, which has a very particular kind of identity, but there are huge pockets of particular personalities and kind of quirkinesses. Is there more that you could do on Etsy to make sellers feel part of a local community and use that identity in presenting what they're making?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we have a really great feature on our site called Teams that allows sellers to self-organize around either location or topics or market segments even. And the beauty of that is that we do see a lot of people organize around location. So you'll get a Toronto street team and a Shoreditch street team. It's a group of sellers who've decided to take it upon themselves to meet up because they are in the same place and they share a lot of the same characteristics. But the great thing about it is it's also global. So we have like a female photographers of Etsy team that has members all over the world. And so those characteristics, while often are very local, are also global in nature and connect people based on interests and talent and skills.
Well, that's very interesting because it's effectively editorializing and also creating a brand in a way around certain parts of the content. But it makes it much, much easier for consumers to access and relate to that community and more likely to buy as well. I mean, you only have to look at the success of Vivo on YouTube. YouTube, vast world scale, but Vivo as a consumer proposition is much more compelling. So going even further down that road?
Yeah, I mean, our teams are really active and feel very strongly about helping us achieve that. So as one example, our Italian team on Etsy, before the site was translated into Italian, took it upon themselves to translate all the seller education materials into Italian, and had this very complicated series of Google Docs where like all the seller education materials were in Italian. And when we realized this, we realized that we needed to build some tools to help harness that energy and frankly that credibility. It's much more worthwhile and much more effective when it comes from the community than when it comes from us in London or Brooklyn or what have you.
How about the craft movement more broadly? It's likely that it seems sensible that this craft community has partly sprung up in reaction to the quite clinical, homogenous, international nature of the internet and being connected, and there's the natural response to that is to try and do something a bit more human and tangible.
Yes.
So is it just a fad?
No, I don't think so. I mean, so many of the things that we see happening on Etsy and even just in the craft movement more broadly are things that come from a very, very long-standing tradition and just now are getting a much more powerful voice through, whether it be Etsy or blogs or Pinterest or Facebook pages that people self-organize around. These aren't new things. People used to get together in small communities. I mean, I think the Women's Institute in the UK is such a great example of that, and now the internet just empowers that in a better way.
That is the first time the WI has been plugged in tech sessions, but I like it a lot. So what can we expect to see from Etsy? What's next on the to-do list?
Yeah, we're spending a lot of time trying to help our sellers grow their businesses. So we're very fortunate that the company's growing at a nice, healthy rate. We get a lot of new sellers day in, day out to the site. Our question is, how do we help them grow And one of the things that we've launched very recently that we're excited about is Etsy wholesale. So we get asked a lot, like, oh, is the next logical step is for Etsy to open stores everywhere to help your sellers have, a physical presence. And rather than doing that, what we've been excited to do is partner with retailers to help our sellers get into those stores, to get into the real world, and try to make the rest of the world a little bit more like Etsy rather than Etsy a little bit more like the rest of the world. So we've partnered with folks like Nordstrom's in the US and West Elm, and you'll see us start to do more of that around the world.
That's fascinating. Well, I think most of my Christmas presents came from Etsy last year. So yeah, you're doing great stuff. But thank you very much for coming into Tech Sessions.
Thank you.